Hello, and welcome to... It is a new spoiler season, which means new combos. Today we are talking about a brand new card from Ikoria, Luminous Broodmoth. But before we dive in, remember to like, sub, comment, and ring YouTube's bell. Okay, so Luminous Broodmoth is a 3/4 flyer for 2 and 2 white. That says whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. So first off, flying counters are a new mechanic from Ikoria. They simply just give a creature flying as long as it has a flying counter on it. Second, this is basically another version of Persist or Undying, or Unflying if you will. I didn't come up with that. It's a top comment on the Reddit post for this card. But you get the point. In fact, it's so similar to those mechanics that this moth is basically a white Machias. Or Moth Chaos. Am I right? That one was mine. I came up with that one. Anyways, let me explain. I've covered Undying and Persist extensively in past combo breakdowns, which you can see here, but essentially when an Undying or Persist creature dies, if it didn't have a +1/+1 counter on it or a -1/-1 counter on it respectively, then it returns to the battlefield with said counter. Now, how these mechanics interact with the Broodmoth is exactly the same as how they interact with each other, and the result is a continual recurring creature. I actually explained the Undying Persist interaction incorrectly in my Machias video, so let me re-explain it here with Unflying. If you have the Broodmother and Kitchen Finks, a Persist creature, on your battlefield, and the Finks dies, both death triggers will go on the stack. The Moth trigger, because the Finks doesn't have flying, and its Persist trigger. But you get to order how these resolve. So let's resolve the Persist trigger first, and the Finks return to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. Now the Moth trigger resolves, but because the Finks is no longer in the graveyard, the trigger fizzles. Now, if the Finks dies again, Persist will no longer trigger because it has a -1/-1 counter on it, but the Moth will still trigger because the Finks doesn't have flying. The Finks dies and then returns to the battlefield with a flying counter on it and no -1/-1 counter, which means if it dies again, Persist will trigger, but the Moth will not. And you just flip-flop between the two abilities and your Finks will always come back to the battlefield as long as you have the Broodmoth. And as long as the Finks doesn't get a -1/-1 counter or flying in some other way. The exact same interaction happens with Undying creatures. Now, even though this moth is an imitation of Machias, it doesn't mean that they can't work together. In fact, Machias and the moth give all your non-human, non-flying creatures the same interaction that was just described. They keep coming back. Add a sack effect and you can do these loops continually for whatever benefit you want. But there is so much more to Luminous Broodmoth than just another Persist combo piece, because let's be honest, a lot of things combo with Persist. The Broodmoth also works well with Solemnity, a white enchantment that does not allow counters to be put on enchantments, artifacts, creatures, or lands, and players can't get counters. So whenever a creature without flying dies, it comes back to the battlefield thanks to Mothra, and it doesn't get a counter because of Solemnity. Add a sack effect for pure value. But we can take this a step further. If we use creatures that sacrifice themselves as they enter the battlefield and have an enter the battlefield effect, we can get maximum value. I'm talking about the Titans from Theros Beyond Death, Uro and Kroxa, both of which need to be sacrificed when they enter the battlefield unless they were cast for their escape cost. But upon entering, Uro lets you drop a land, gain 3 life, and draw a card, and Kroxa makes your opponents discard cards and lose life. So if we play either of those when we have Solemnity and the Moth out, they enter the battlefield, do their thing, get sacked because of their ETB clause, and then come back because of the Moth. Solemnity prevents the flying counter from being put on them, and they get sacked again because they didn't come in with their escape ability. This keeps going and going until you either win with Kroxa's pinging of damage or deck yourself with Uro, and in that case you could always just win with Jace. And to top all of that off, this can all be done in Pioneer, not just EDH. In the same vein as this, Evoke creatures can give you a lot of value with Broodmoth. Evoke is when you cast a creature for a lesser cost, but you need to sacrifice it when it enters the battlefield. but at least you get the enter the battlefield effect or leave the battlefield effect on the creature. Now, a lot of good Evoke creatures have flying, like Revelark and Muldrifter, so you can't use those, but you can still use others like Ingot Chewer and Shriekmaw. While this isn't an infinite combo, you still get insane value. Look at Ingot Chewer. For 1 red you can evoke him, and when he enters the battlefield you destroy an artifact. He then gets sacked because of the evoke cost and returns to the battlefield because of the moth. When he re-enters you get to destroy another artifact and keep a 3/3 flyer, all for 1 red mana. Now that is value. After a while though, it becomes trickier to combo off with the moth compared to Undying and Persist, because nothing cancels out these flying counters, they have to be removed. And while removing counters is not unheard of in Magic, it usually requires some setup such as attacking or having to pay a cost of some sort. However, there are at least 3 creatures that I know of that can remove counters when they return to the battlefield. Sun Cleanser, Medicine Runner, and Quarry Hauler. All 3 of these can remove the flying counter from themselves when they enter the battlefield. Meaning, with the sack outlet, you can continually loop these creatures just like a Persist or Undying creature. Another way to remove these counters is to simply blink the creature with a flying counter on it. When you blink a creature, it leaves the battlefield and returns either immediately or at the end of turn, depending on the card. Either way, it will return without the flying counter on it, ready to die again. Finally, there are ways to get rid of flying on your creature. An extreme way is like gifting your opponent Archetype of Imagination, or equipping your creature with equipments like Magebane Armor or Colossus Hammer. Actually, Ashnod's Altar and Magebane Armor creates a loop where you can sack the creature for 2 mana and then use that 2 mana to equip the Magebane Armor to the now flying creature and make it lose flying. However, this may be a bit deceiving because even though Magebane Armor makes a creature lose flying when it is equipped, the creature can still regain flying from another effect, such as Mighty Leap, even though the armor is still equipped. This is part of the reason why these 2 old enchantments won't work the way you may think. Both Gravity Sphere and Mystic Decree make all creatures lose flying. Now before I get into this, I will preface that this might change when the official ruling for flying counters comes out, but as of now this is how these work. When either enchantments enter the battlefield, all creatures with flying will lose flying, and any creature with flying entering the battlefield will also lose flying. But since the creature card returning with a moth does not have flying itself, and it's gaining flying from the flying counter, it will still have flying from that counter. Now, if you were to blink either of these enchantments, then the flying creature would lose flying when the enchantment re-enters. Or if you were to play one of these enchantments after you have a bunch of creatures with flying counters on them, they would also lose their flying. But these enchantments will not remove flying from a creature entering with a flying counter on it. This is because of layers and timestamps, which are a part of Magic's rulings that I'm not going to get into right now. But anyways, are you excited for Ikoria? Are you going to use Luminous Broodmoth? I don't see why not, it's a fantastic card. Let me know down below, and when you need a new combo, come back here to Combo Breakdown.